A week after Nina Reiser vanished, hope for her return is fading fast.
There was a sense of foreboding on my part. I did fear that she was in fact dead, but we had no idea where she was.
She didn't strike me as a person who would just flake out and decide she needed to have a time out from her life. I really didn't want to think about the worst possible scenario. And I didn't for a few days. And then it did not seem like that was going to happen, that she was going to come back.
Detectives go looking for clues in the missing woman's past.
Nina was born in Russia, and she was an OB/GYN trained in Russia.
She had studied throughout the summer of 2006 and was planning on taking and actually signed up for and paid for the medical exams here in the United States to become a doctor here.
Born to a pair of doctors, Nina was bright and well educated. But she always yearned for something beyond Eastern Europe.
She had a joy, vivre. She wanted to devour life.
One day in St. Petersburg, Russia, when Nina was in her mid-20s, a girlfriend was going on a blind date with an American businessman named Hans Reiser and asked Nina along.
She was the interpreter for the friend, and then she and Hans hit it off.
Hans was captivated by her beauty and intelligence. Nina was equally intrigued by the brilliant and celebrated computer guru.
Hans himself was a kid who grew up sort of a loner. He was a high school dropout, believe it or not. And then in his early teens, before ordinary people would graduate from college, I think at the age of 14, he took the SATs and was accepted to University of California at Berkeley.
He never graduated. He was in some type of independent studies, and he worked in the computer lab there.
He left the school, according to what some people had said, because it wasn't challenging enough.
Hans launched his own software company, Namesys, and became an overnight sensation.
Hans ended up developing a file system called the Reiser file system that's used in Linux servers all over the world. In his world, in the world of computers and Linux, he's quite famous and well known.
If the Reiser file system had become the standard file system for the Linux operating system, Hans would have been worth millions, many millions.
Talk about how Hans wasn't your typical knight in shining armor. He was into computer games and martial arts. A whirlwind romance between beauty and the geek.
By 1999, she's living with him in America, pregnant with their first child, and that's also the year they get married.
While Nina studied for her medical license, Hans gave her a job with his firm.
She was actually the CFO, the chief financial officer of the company. She essentially handled the books and the finances for the company. They were happy, they were successful, their business was going well. Nina was excited about becoming a doctor in the United States. They were both excited about becoming parents.
I think Nina and Hans were happy together initially. She told me that she married him because she loved him and that they had a lot of fun together, that they had a vision of growing this company of Hans's, and that she thought that Hans was really interesting and a very unusual man.
Rory was born in 1999. Daughter Neo came 2 years later, but parenthood exposed a deep rift in the marriage.
They each had very wildly differing views on how their kids should be raised. Nina wanted the kids to go to school and grow up like American kids do. Hans thought that the teachers and the schools were the worst thing that could possibly happen to the kids. It would ruin them.
Nina Reiser accused Hans of treating their children as little adults, allowing him, their son, to play video games and watch movies that were violent, that depicted images of war and gore. Hans believed there was nothing wrong with that.
He also had some very chauvinistic attitudes about women that didn't really come out until they had kids. So I think that things soured and got worse.
Dominique here again, describing examples of Hans's weird behavior towards Nina.
I had sent Hans 2 books. One was Dummy's Guide to Interpersonal Communication, and the other is Dummy's Guide to Divorce. And I said to Hans, "You're going to need one of these books. You get to choose at this point which one it is. I would suggest the one that has to do with interpersonal communication."
As the marriage continued to deteriorate, Hans spent months at a time working in Russia. Nina remained at home in Oakland, raising the kids.
There was always a strain after the children, especially Niall, was born. The times that Hans would visit, it was more like a stranger coming back than a spouse.
Hans turned to his oldest friend, Sean Sturgeon, to keep an eye on his wife.
Hans and I met when we were about the same age, which was about 15, 16. We were doing gaming, Dungeons and Dragons. And what made us friends was that we were both social outcasts. We both deviated from the norm in different ways.
When Hans is away in Russia all that time, and Nina is in Oakland watching over the business from the financial side of things, Sean is the person keeping her company. Sean is the one looking after Nina.
Nina and I gradually came to have romantic feelings towards each other. Hans was not going to change. He would commit to make changes, but he would immediately break his word.
Nina didn't just leave Hans for his best friend. Nina left Hans for his only friend. And these are guys that have been friends for like 25 years.
In 2004, Nina filed for divorce. Then, a year later, she left Sean for Anthony, the man she was dating at the time of her disappearance. When police take a closer look at the men in Nina's life, they uncover some simmering tensions.
Anthony was kind of upset with Nina for still communicating with Sean Sturgeon and getting money from Sean Sturgeon. And I think he felt he was pushing Nina away from him at that point.
Nina's life was very messy. With 3 angry, jealous men in her life, was it possible that she'd gotten caught in the crossfire? There wasn't any proof of wrongdoing. Still, police were keeping a careful eye on all 3 of their suspects.